Hello, folks, and welcome to part 2 of Dogen's weird views about space. And remember, we have a retreat coming up for the fall of 2020, and you can join it online. And the information is at the website you're seeing on your screen, aczc.org. That's angelcityzencenter.org for information and registration. Okay, this gets convoluted for all of you folks who think that I just work 12 minutes a week because you see a 12-minute video once a week or whatever. I've been really trying to figure this one out. Figuring out is more like trying to figure out how to explain this second part. It seems kind of straightforward, but it's not as straightforward as it seems. Or maybe it doesn't seem straightforward at all. I don't know. You tell me. Okay, the second part of Dogen's essay about space, Koku, begins like this. There once was a Zen priest named Ryo, whose something were extremely low. Anyway, Ryo went to go see Baso, who is also known as Matsu, who's a very famous Zen teacher. And Ryo was reportedly a really smart guy who gave a lot of lectures on one of his favorite Buddhist sutras. So when he got to Baso's place, Baso said, "What sutra do you lecture on?" And Ryo said, "The Heart Sutra." Well, we all know the Heart Sutra, or you should know the Heart Sutra if you've been watching this video series for a while. But what you need to know to follow the story is that the word heart in the Heart Sutra is shin, kokuro, which is also the same character used for mind. So we make a big distinction in the West between mind and heart. Like heart is the emotional part of the psyche and mind is the rational thinking part of the psyche. They don't make that distinction in Japanese or Chinese. It's all mind-heart. And furthermore, in Zen, the word mind is a much bigger sort of meaning than just the mind that you have in your own little noggin. Here, it is universal mind. So that's what you need to know to follow the story. Baso asked Ryo, "With what do you lecture?" And Ryo said, "I lecture with my mind, or I lecture with my heart." So Shingyo is the sutra. So he lectures with his shin, with not his shin on his leg, but his mind-heart. Baso said, "They say mind is like a leading actor, the will is like a supporting actor, and the 6 kinds of consciousness are the accompanying cast. How are these able to lecture on the sutra?" Ryo replied, "If mind is unable to give the lecture, space is hardly able to give the lecture, is it?" Baso said, "Space itself indeed is able to give lectures." Ryo got all cocky and he's leaving the place swinging his sleeves the way people did in those days to show their arrogance. And as Ryo was leaving, Baso shouted after him, "Hey Ryo!" Ryo turned. Baso said, "From birth to death, it's just like this." That ending phrase comes up in another koan who's, I can't remember exactly how that one goes, but this is, it's a sort of a phrase that gets used in a few places. And at that moment, Ryo got it. He had some kind of an insight, and the story says he went off to the mountains and he was never heard from again. The end, I guess. Now, Dogen comments on this, and he says, for one thing, what lectures on sutras is always empty space, and that without empty space, not even one lecture could ever be given on any sutra. Now, as we talked about yesterday, there's that theory that's going around in that book, A Universe from Nothing by Lawrence Krauss, that everything is just a permutation of empty space. And, you know, his point of view has to do with the way empty space percolates with, what do they call them, virtual particles and everything, and how the universe might have arisen just from pure emptiness. Now, whether you believe that or not, the current scientific understanding of our bodies, even just our bodies, is that they're mostly empty space, and even the atoms and molecules that we used to think were the solid parts are not actually solid. They're just permutations of energy. So what he's saying, what Dogen is saying, kind of goes along with that view of science, but I don't think that's quite what Dogen is getting at. He's getting at more of an intuitive perception of how things are. The next thing Dogen says here is, whether it's the heart, or, aka mind, sutra, or a body sutra, it's always spoken about by space. So space is what expounds on the sutra. So space is talking to space about space. Emptiness is talking to emptiness about emptiness, and the talk itself is emptiness. But that doesn't mean that he's taking a kind of nihilistic view of like it's all nothing and it doesn't matter, man. He's saying that it does matter, but what it is ultimately is emptiness. So that gives you a whole different point of view on it. Now, this is the part where it gets kind of tricky even for me, because I'm trying to work on how to explain my own understanding. Ziggy's also explaining his understanding of it way over there, but that's his problem. And I pulled out this quotation from Ramesh Balsekar. He is trying to summarize the philosophy of his teacher Nisargadatta Maharaj, but he's saying it in quite a different way from the way Nisargadatta Maharaj said it. But he says, Noumenon, now that's one of those big philosophy words I don't really understand. Well, let's get to it and I'll back up after. Noumenon, the only subject, objectifies itself and perceives the universe manifesting phenomenally inside itself, but apparently outside to be a perceivable object. You got that? Let's see what we can do with this. Now, noumenon, according to Wikipedia, a noumenon is a posited object or event that exists independently of human sense and or perception. And apparently Immanuel Kant made up the word, and it's usually identified with idealistic philosophy. Nishijima Roshi was not a fan of idealistic philosophy. Well, let's put that differently. He said idealistic philosophy was valuable but one-sided, just like materialistic philosophy is valuable but one-sided, and that Buddhism is something different. So talking about noumenon in the context of Buddhism is a little iffy because, well, there's certain forms of Buddhism that are idealistic, but not Dogen's form. Now, Shohaku Okumura has something to say about this. He talks about Dogen's view of the Surangama Sutra, which we don't really need to worry about, but he says, Dogen did not appreciate the Surangama Sutra because it promoted this concept of an original fundamental mind, in quotes, as noumenon. And what the Surangama Sutra says is, from the time without beginning, all beings have mistakenly identified with what they are aware of. Controlled by their experience of perceived objects, they lose track of their fundamental minds. Okay? Okumura Roshi explains it like this. He says, the phrase their fundamental minds refers to the one mind, mind nature, original mind, etc., the mind source as noumenon. In this section of the sutra, the fundamental mind, the originally pure and wondrous understanding mind, is compared to an innkeeper. The thinking mind, caused by encountering objects, therefore based on dichotomy between subject and object, is compared to the visitors of the inn. Thinking mind is conditioned, impermanent, and ever-changing, but the innkeeper is always there, so it is permanent. So he's talking about a permanent, unchanging mind somewhere, and then all these impermanent things that are separate from us. So the difference between Dogen's philosophy and the Surangama Sutra is in this idea of mind as a separate sort of thing, because Dogen will say everything is mind alone, and he'll also go on to say mind is fences, tiles, walls, and pebbles. Mind is everything. Everything you encounter is mind. Now, I don't think that's the noumenon that Ramesh Balsekar is talking about, which is why I use this quote, because I've read the rest of the book, and I feel like Balsekar is talking about the same thing as Dogen is, that this noumenon isn't something that's separate from everything else, it is everything else. So let's continue with that quote. Balsekar says, for the noumenon to express itself objectively as the phenomenal universe, the concept of space-time, that's space-time, comes into being, because objects, in order to be cognizable, in order for us to even recognize that they're there and think about them, have to be extended in space by giving them volume and must be stretched in duration or time, because otherwise they could not be perceived. The sentient being, he says, is only a very small part within this process of the apparent mirrorization of the noumenon into the phenomenal universe. Got that? No, probably not. It's a very smarty-pants way of trying to say that everything is mind and explain why space and time exist, because space and time are necessary for mind to recognize itself as an object. But ultimately there is the one mind looking at the one mind, which is ultimately emptiness. So maybe you think that God knows everything, but maybe the reason God knows everything is because there's people like you and me out there who are kind of gathering the information for him. That's just one way I thought of to look at it this morning when I was walking the dog. I don't know if that's any value or not. So let's go back to what Dogen says, because we're almost at the end of it. He says that wisdom with a teacher and wisdom without a teacher is space. And he says that the development of intelligence that you were born with and the development of intelligence you learned is space. And he says that becoming a Buddha or becoming a teacher of Buddhism is also space. So it's not just space as objects and things like yourself and other things, but even the very actions you take are also examples of emptiness, of space. But like I said, don't think of this as nihilistic emptiness. This is a kind of a different emptiness that is full of value, whose motive power is love, if you want to really get into that kind of thing. That's where we're going with this. And to wrap this thing up, Dogen quotes Vasubandhu, who's one of the most respected figures in what they call Yogacara or Vijnanavada Buddhism, which is often thought of as radical Buddhist idealism. So it's interesting that Dogen would quote him. But here's the quote he pulls from Vasubandhu. The mind is the same as the world of space, and it reveals the reality that is equally space. When we are able to realize and verify space, there is no right and nothing wrong. Now, that whole no right and nothing wrong is kind of a dangerous idea if it gets into the wrong hands. In conventional terms, yes, there is right and wrong. There are things you should do and things you shouldn't do, and you got to be careful with that. But there's also another way of looking at things, and Dogen talks about this too, where there is no right or wrong, because those kind of splitting things up into those kind of categories doesn't really fit. But when you are talking to me, sometimes those categories do fit. So Dogen is contradictory as heck. Then, the last thing Dogen says is when a person faces a wall, meaning doing Zazen, of course, that person meets the wall and the wall meets the person. Here, he says, are mind as fences and walls and mind as withered trees. And I already talked about that fences, trees, tiles, and pebbles thing. Withered trees is probably a kind of an expression of a student who feels probably like a withered tree when you're sitting there doing Zazen. So the wall that you're staring at when you're doing Zazen is just as much you as you are. That's what Dogen is saying. So you're watching yourself be yourself and do yourself, and even the watching is part of the same self that is doing all of this. And he wraps this up by saying a big stone being big and a small stone being small is no right and nothing wrong. So reality is the state of no right and nothing wrong. Investigate the fact right now that empty space is the treasury of the true Dharma I and the fine mind of Nirvana. And that is him referencing his own book, because the title Shobo Genzo means the what is it called? The true Dharma I treasury and the fine mind of Nirvana. So it's like one of those scenes in a movie where a character in the movie references the title of the movie. So he's being kind of cheesy here. Now, I don't know if all of the foregoing was just like a word soup for everybody out there. I find this stuff fascinating and I enjoy writing about it, and that's what I'm doing with this book. I'm starting from what I think are sort of simple, straightforward ideas about why you should be a good person and why Buddhism values ethics, and trying to tie that into some of this crazy esoteric stuff that I find really fascinating. And maybe I'm just going to lose my whole audience halfway through the book. I don't know. I'm trying to work on it so it doesn't come out that way. Anyway, if you want to help me do that, while I sit here and type on the computer. You can send a donation to the address that's appearing on your screen, hardcorezen.info/donate. That helps me out. That's my main way, my main source of income. If you're having trouble with money, don't send me money because I'm, not desperate. But the reason I'm not desperate is because people like you, well, or your friends, keep sending me money, and I really appreciate that, and I thank you very much. Have a good time all the time. See you later. Bye.